The basket that wouldn't empty. The vines hum when I write, though they hum for no one in particular. Their sound moves through the beams and the window slats like breath through a reed flute, steady, patient, unbothered by the weight of memory. Below my workshop I can hear my apprentices laughing, the sound of them rising with the smell of sap and smoke from the evening fires. I should be resting. The day has been long, and my hands ache from splitting vines, but the hum will not leave me until I answer it. That is why I open this journal tonight. You will read these pages one day, perhaps when you have stayed up too late over your own work, believing that one more careful knot will hold the world together. When you do, I want you to know that I once believed the same thing, and that belief nearly broke me. The glow bead beside my bench flickers, painting the tools in soft green light. Dust motes drift through the beam like tiny seeds. My hair, now silvered at the edges, still catches the scent of resin and rain. The bridge outside sighs when the wind crosses its ropes. I helped build that bridge, though not in the way I meant to. It hums because of me, and because of the lesson the vines taught all of Terra the year I tried to weave perfection. Back then the village was younger, and so was I. I remember the color of the morning's first, pale gold sifting through layers of mist, dew shining on the rope rails, the air already buzzing with the day's work. The upper canopy smelled of fruit peel, wet moss, and the faint sharpness of bark smoke from the hearths below. Every day began with the morning bell, one deep, rounded note that seemed to shake the water from the leaves. We apprentices would shuffle to the communal terrace, still half asleep, our fingers sticky with yesterday's sap. Someone always forgot their gloves, someone always sang off-key. We ate from woven leaf bowls, grain cakes, sweet root mash, the last of the night's tea still steaming. Laughter came easily in those moments before the sun climbed high enough to bleach the glow from the vines. I worked under Serryn, the mist-born master of the upper weaving house. Her hair was the color of cloud light and her voice softer than most silences. She spoke rarely, because her hands did the talking, long fingers tracing the curve of a proper rim, the measured slack that made a weave breathe instead of break. She could glance at a basket and know if the maker had been angry or afraid. Her own work always felt alive, flexible, light, strong in the way living wood is strong. Mine looked fine until you touched it. Then you could feel the strain beneath the polish. There were 6 of us apprentices that season. Errol was the oldest, and the one everyone trusted to carry finished baskets down to the trade lifts. Grove-born like me, he had the calm of soil after rain, steady, grounded, never hurried. He was the kind who could listen without interrupting, and when he did speak, his humor came out dry and unexpected. Kevin, the youngest, was all light and noise, a dawn-born boy who beat rhythms on empty crates and sang while he worked until Serryn glared him silent. We were a mismatched line of workers, but in the canopy's rhythm we found something close to harmony. Each morning began the same. We soaked fresh vines in the troughs fed by captured rainwater, waiting until the fibers softened and the sap rose faintly to the surface. Then we split, smoothed, and hung them to breathe. The workshop would fill with a low rustle like wind through reeds. The scent of wet vine mixed with resin smoke made my stomach flutter with both hunger and nerves. I loved that smell, it meant potential. It also meant judgment. Every piece we touched carried the memory of our hands, and I feared mine remembered too much trembling. Serryn's first rule was rhythm. If you cannot breathe with the forest, you cannot build for it, she told us during the first week. To prove her point, she made us weave to sound, Kevin's light drumming on a wooden frame. The beats mimicked the distant heart of the canopy, the slow, even pulse of life moving through roots and leaves. Everyone followed easily except me. My fingers rushed ahead, tightening with each note. When she stopped us to check, my piece was flawless in shape but stiff as bark. Hesra lifted it, pressed the rim once, and the crack echoed louder than Kivon's drum. She didn't scold. She simply said, "Perfection breaks faster than patience," and handed me another bundle. I told myself she didn't understand how much I wanted to please her. That was my first mistake. That night, after supper on the terraces, Errol found me still at the troughs. The air shimmered with glowflies, their tiny bodies blinking gold. He leaned against a post, chewing a slice of dried fruit. "You planning to sleep this week?" he asked. I told him the weave still felt wrong. "Maybe the forest just wants you to stop strangling it," he said. When I frowned, he laughed softly. "You tie the knots like you're holding your breath. No wonder the vines can't." He meant it kindly, but the words prickled. I went to bed angry at him and woke angrier at myself. The next day was the first true harvest send-off, and the workshop buzzed with urgency. Merchants from the lower towns had arrived early, their river barges waiting beneath the main lifts. Everyone doubled pace. Hesra moved through the rows, checking work, adjusting hands, murmuring small corrections. I caught her watching me once and turned away too quickly, which made me pull the weave even tighter. My palms burned, my shoulders ached, but I refused to stop. When the dusk bell sounded, its tone deep and round as the heart of the forest, the others set down their tools. I kept working. The bell meant little to me then. I thought diligence was stronger than rhythm. The glow beads cast shifting circles across the benches as the light dimmed. The vines gleamed slick and green in the lamplight. Outside, the canopy's hum changed pitch, as though warning me. I ignored it. Each pull of the strand felt like proof that I could master something. By the time the moon rose through the leaves, my basket stood finished, a perfect symmetry of form. I pressed the rim, it did not move. I mistook stillness for strength. At dawn Errol and I rode the lift to the trade decks. Mist swirled below, carrying the smell of river clay and fruit. The merchants waited with polite smiles and measuring eyes. They tested the baskets one by one. The first split with a small sigh, the second held for a moment before the base collapsed. By the third, laughter rippled through the line, uneasy, trying to soften the embarrassment. I felt every sound in my spine. Hesra said nothing. She only touched my arm, light as breath, and gathered the broken pieces herself. Errol set a hand to my shoulder briefly, grounding me. That simple kindness cracked something deeper than shame. I worked in silence the rest of the day, though the silence was heavier than noise. When evening came, the others drifted down to the celebration decks, where the merchants poured cider and played reed flutes. I stayed behind, cleaning tools that didn't need cleaning. Through the open wall I could see lanterns swinging between branches like captured stars. The air smelled of smoke and sugar. I wanted to go but couldn't bear the thought of laughter near me. Sleep avoided me. I lay staring at the ceiling, hearing the vines outside rustle. They hummed the same low tone they always had, but now it felt like accusation. I sat up, lit the lamp, and stared at my hands. Thin lines of dried sap mapped my palms like scars. No matter how I scrubbed, they stayed. I whispered promises to the air. Tomorrow I would fix everything, tomorrow Hesra would nod, tomorrow the merchants would forget. Worry, once planted, grows best in promises made to yourself. Before dawn I was back at the bench. The mist pressed against the windows, soft and silver. My eyes burned from lack of sleep. The vines were cold to the touch. I tried to work gently, but my body knew only tension. Each motion pulled tighter, each breath shorter. When Hesra arrived, she watched a moment, then said, "You pull too hard." She didn't wait for my answer. Her footsteps faded into the morning hum. By midday the basket gleamed flawless again. Errol came to collect it for the next send-off. He turned it over in his hands, expression unreadable. "It feels angry," he said finally. "Maybe it learned from you." I told him to just deliver it. He sighed, nodded, and left. When the merchants opened it, the rim shattered at their first touch. The silence afterward was worse than laughter. Hesra whispered to the overseer, then turned back to me. "Go home. Rest. Tomorrow we begin again." Her calm hurt more than scolding ever could. I wandered the canopy instead. Rain drifted in, mist thick enough to taste. The bridges shone slick underfoot. Below me the forest breathed, creaking wood, dripping leaves, frogs beginning their songs. I leaned against the rail, watching droplets gather and fall, and thought of how much energy I had wasted trying to hold everything still. The world moved without my permission. Even the great trunks swayed gently, alive in their own rhythm. Only I refused to move. When the dusk bell tolled, I stopped fighting it. The tone rolled through the trees, deep and kind. I cried then, quietly, not from shame but from relief. After it faded, I returned to the workshop. The benches were clean. On mine lay a single new vine, soaked and supple, left by Hesra. I sat and touched it. The fiber pulsed faintly beneath my fingers, alive. I did not weave. I only listened to the hum until my breathing matched it. That was the first time in months that I felt the forest accept me again. The next morning I wove differently. Slower. I left space between the strands, small gaps where air could move. The pattern wavered. The rim tilted slightly. It was imperfect. When I pressed it, it yielded and held. It breathed. Hesra looked at it, then at me, and nodded once. Better. She hung it above her bench. Years later, when she retired, she gave it to me. It sits by my writing table now, faded to gold. The vines are brittle, but if you run your fingers along them you can still feel warmth. That, apprentices, is how the bridge outside began, but that is a story for another page. For now, remember this: care is not control. Effort without rest is pride wearing duty's mask. The forest does not ask for perfection, only presence. Leave space in your weave for air, and in yourself for forgiveness. When your hands tremble with the need to tighten, let them loosen instead. The vines forgive quickly. You must learn to do the same. I set my pen down and watch the ink pool at the nib. The glow bead flickers again, the wind must have shifted. Through the open shutters the smell of fruit peel drifts up from the terraces. The apprentices are cleaning the presses below, someone has spilled resin, and they are blaming one another in voices that echo against the trunks. I hear a thud, a quick apology, then laughter that bursts like sap from a crack in bark. The sound loosens something inside me. I forget sometimes that joy is also part of the work. When I was their age, I would have hidden such laughter. We learned to keep quiet in the presence of our elders, to fold our hands when we failed and bow when we succeeded. Hesra believed discipline steadied the heart, and she wasn't wrong, but too much steadiness can become stillness. I tell my apprentices now that a workshop without laughter is a room without light. Some still whisper that I've grown sentimental, but I have earned the right to be soft. I close my eyes for a moment. The hum outside changes pitch, the vines along the bridge catching the same current that once moved through the baskets. It's strange how sound remembers shape. Each note seems to brush the air around my heart. I imagine Hesra somewhere in the forest's deep, nodding approval, and Errol on some distant trade road, humming the same work tune he used to keep the lift steady. Time has taken them both away, yet their rhythm still moves through this place. I remember one evening not long after the second failure. Hesra had called us together at the edge of the terraces for a lesson that wasn't about weaving at all. The sky was turning violet, the first stars peering between the leaves. She held a single vine in her hand and tied what she called a breathing knot. She left a small loop loose at its center, then passed it around for us to touch. "This is what patience feels like," she said. "Tight enough to hold, loose enough to live." We passed it from palm to palm. When it reached me, the warmth of her hand still lingered. I remember thinking that if I could understand that knot, I would never fail again. It took years to realize that the point was never to understand it, only to keep practicing until it became part of my hands. The apprentices below have quieted now. I can hear only the scrape of brushes against wood. Their rhythm comforts me. I wonder which of them will stay after the bell tonight, certain that one more basket will make the difference between mediocrity and mastery. Probably Lessa. She has the same stubborn crease between her brows that I once carried. Tomorrow I'll pretend not to notice when she lingers. Sometimes a lesson has to bloom in solitude before it can be shared. The ink on the page is beginning to dry unevenly. I flex my fingers, feeling the stiffness of age in my knuckles. My skin is lined where the sap once cut tiny grooves. They never faded, only filled with light. When the dusk settles into full night, they glow faintly, old echoes of my Grove-born blood. The younger weavers sometimes stare, thinking the glow means power. It doesn't. It means I have lived long enough for the forest to mark me as its own. Every scar, every shimmer, every knot under my skin is proof that I learned slowly but well. I rise and step to the window. Below, the glow beads sway on their cords, tiny stars strung between homes. The bridge hums louder now, the wind turning its ropes into harp strings. I remember the first time I heard that sound, I thought it was haunting. Now I know it's simply alive. The forest talks this way when it forgives. The tone is low, patient, and endless. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Hesra had shouted instead of whispering, if Errol had scolded instead of laughed. Would I have listened sooner, or would I have hardened further? I think the latter. Fear answers only to gentleness, that is why the vines never punished me. They simply broke and waited for me to notice. I try to do the same with my apprentices now. When one of them tangles a line or burns a coil of fiber in the steamer, I say little. I set the ruined work on the shelf and tell them to look at it tomorrow. By the next morning, the guild has cooled enough that they can see the shape of the lesson. I take the old basket down from the shelf where it rests. The vines are brittle, faded to the color of honey. Dust clings to the inside rim. I run my thumb along the crooked weave. Even now, after all these years, I can feel the tension frozen inside it, the echo of my younger self pulling too tight. The thought should shame me, but it doesn't. The basket feels like an old friend who knows every flaw in my character and loves me anyway. If you are reading this, apprentice, stop a moment and look at your hands. Are they clenched? Are you gripping the pen as though it might escape you? Loosen them. The work will still be there when you exhale. I used to think mastery was a kind of control over time. That if I could perfect one motion, the world would pause long enough to admire it. But the world never pauses. The forest moves on, vines growing over the benches, roots creeping into the cracks. Even the hum changes note each season. What endures is not perfection but rhythm. The wind shifts again, carrying the scent of wet soil. Somewhere a night bird calls. I remember a different night, long ago, when I sat on the same ledge unable to face the next morning. I almost left the craft altogether. I had packed my tools, ready to join a trade caravan. Then Errol appeared with a cup of steamed tea and said, "If you quit every time something breaks, you'll spend your life running from splinters." He wasn't poetic, my Errol, but he was right. I stayed. I wonder if he ever knew that his careless kindness built more bridges than my finest work. I hear footsteps on the stairs now, soft ones. Lessa again, no doubt. She always forgets to oil her soles, and the boards creak when she tries to sneak in. I keep writing, pretending not to notice until she reaches the doorway. "Master," she whispers. I answer without turning. "Yes." The others are asleep. I wanted to ask, "How do you know when it's finished?" I smile at the question. I once asked Heshra the same thing. "When it breathes," I tell her. There is a pause, a small intake of breath, then the quiet pad of feet retreating down the stairs. She will understand in time. I return to the page. My ink has thickened, the last lines drag slightly. I don't mind. Imperfection gives the words texture. Perhaps someone years from now will trace these ridges and feel the tremor of my hand, the way the vines remember touch. I dip the pen again, slower this time, and write what Heshra never said aloud, that every craft is a conversation. You begin by thinking you are speaking to the material, giving it commands, forcing it to obey. Eventually you realize you are the one being taught. Outside, the hum softens as the wind dies. The glow beads flicker once, twice, then settle into their gentle pulse. I sit with the quiet. My joints ache, but it is a good ache, the kind that reminds me I have spent a lifetime in motion. The ink on the page glistens, then dulls. I blow on it once, the way Heshra blew on her vines to make them supple. The words blur at the edges, a small imperfection I choose to keep. If you are still reading, apprentice, remember this: the lesson does not end when you finish a basket or close a book. It lives in the pause between breaths, in the space between fibers. When your work sings back to you, do not ask if it praises or scolds. Listen to its tone. If it hums softly, you are part of the rhythm at last. I can hear the apprentices settling into sleep. The forest exhales around us, its breath moving through the leaves and the bridges and the half-finished baskets waiting for morning. I add one last line before the ink runs dry. Tomorrow, I will teach them how to leave one knot loose. The glow bead on my table quivers in its cage of glass. The storm outside hasn't broken yet, but the air tastes like metal and sap, the way it does when the clouds are gathering strength. The ropes of the bridge thump now and then against the outer wall, their rhythm uneven, impatient. I should sleep. The apprentices have gone quiet below, no more laughter, no more clatter of cups, but my hands are restless. Writing steadies them better than rest ever has. The ink smells sharp tonight. Rain always pulls the old memories to the surface, the way water brings roots close to the skin of the soil. There was a season when I lived in this same kind of air, heavy, waiting for a storm that wouldn't come, surrounded by silence thick enough to drown in. The morning after my baskets broke was the longest walk I have ever taken. The path from my hut to the weaving house takes perhaps 5 minutes when you're unburdened. That day it stretched into forever. The bridges were slick with dew. The ropes dark with moisture. The whole forest felt freshly washed and strangely bright, as if daring me to find a place for myself inside its perfection. I met the dye merchant first, an older woman named Mara whose hands were always stained blue. She was hanging strips of cloth to dry when I passed. "Morning, girl," she said, and the cloth sagged in her grasp as if it too felt awkward. I tried to answer, but the words stuck in my throat. She nodded toward the vines under my arm. "You'll do better next batch. The forest forgives." I could only manage a small, "Thank you." She looked relieved, as if she'd said the right charm to ward off shame. Farther along, two children were playing beside the lower ropeway. They had scavenged scraps of vine and were pretending to weave, tugging until the strands squealed. "Look! It broke," one shouted, laughing. "You pulled too hard." They weren't mocking me on purpose, they didn't know who I was, but the echo of their laughter chased me up the path until I reached the workshop. The baskets were waiting outside, stacked neatly in the morning mist. The smell hit first: old fruit, souring sweetness, the faint bitterness of split fibers. I wanted to believe they weren't mine. But I knew every pattern, every too-tight knot. I crouched to gather them before anyone arrived, but the vines cracked and left splinters in my palms. Errol found me there. He looked at the heap, then at my hands. "You should come in before the bell," he said. His voice was careful, quiet. "Let the others sweep later." I stood, unable to meet his eyes. He reached to take one of the baskets and the bottom fell through, spilling fragments at his feet. For a moment he looked ready to laugh, the absurdity of it, but the smile never came. "They're only vines," he said softly. "Don't let them turn you to stone." Then he walked inside. The apprentices were already working. Even Kivin, who could never keep still, sat straight and silent. Heshra entered last. Her hair damp from mist, the lines of her face unreadable. She took one long look at the wreckage by the door. "Sweep the floor before you start," she said. Her voice carried no anger, no disappointment, only finality. I obeyed. Sweeping used to soothe me. That morning it felt like digging my own grave. The broom rasped against the boards, dust rose in small clouds and clung to my arms. Every stroke sounded too loud. When I finished, Heshra had already turned away. The room's silence folded around me like damp cloth. We worked until the meal bell. I stayed behind, pretending to check the water level in the troughs. My stomach twisted with hunger, but pride kept me from joining the others. From the terrace I heard laughter, sharp, uncertain, trying to pretend nothing was wrong. When Errol returned, he set a plate beside me. "Eat," he said. "You'll make the vines nervous." The attempt at humor nearly broke me. I ate a few bites to satisfy him. The bread tasted like dust. That evening, I lingered after the others left. The air outside glowed with lantern light from the merchants' camp below. Music floated up through the branches, flutes, a hand drum, voices bright with cider. I pressed my hands against the window frame, wishing the sound could reach whatever part of me had gone deaf. The vines along the railing swayed, whispering, but I didn't know their language anymore. Days thickened. Silence became a second skin. No one said my name. Heshra corrected the others, never me. I began counting breaths between the sounds that remained, a knife scraping, a drop of water from the ceiling trough, the creak of the bridge underfoot. Each sound was an island, I lived between them. In the evenings I carried my worst work to the compost pit. The soil there was dark and fragrant, steaming slightly in the cooler air. I buried the baskets in layers, whispering apologies. Once, as I covered the last fragments, I thought I heard a hum rising from the ground, faint but sure. I pressed my ear to the earth until the damp soaked my hair. The vibration matched my pulse. I took it for forgiveness. Errol found me a few nights later. His voice startled me out of the hum. "You'll run out of ground at this rate." I brushed dirt from my knees. "It's the only place they belong." He crouched beside me. "Silence isn't a punishment, you know. It's the forest catching its breath. Then it can keep holding it," I said. "I'm not listening." "No," he said. "You're shouting so loud inside your head you can't hear anything else." He stood and left before I could answer. His footsteps faded into the rustle of leaves. The next morning Hesra placed a single vine on my bench. "Work with me," she said. She didn't wait for an answer. She began to weave. Her movements were slower than usual, deliberate, each pole balanced between strength and grace. I tried to match her rhythm but my fingers twitched, tightening too soon. She didn't correct me. She only continued, her breathing even, her hands patient. The smell of wet fiber and smoke filled the air. Gradually, my muscles fell into her pace. Pull, fold, breathe. When we finished, our baskets sat side by side. Mine was smaller, rougher, but alive. "Better," she said, and left. After that, the silence changed texture. It no longer pressed down, it held. I began to hear small sounds again, the sigh of water in the trough, the slow drip of sap, the way Hesra cleared her throat before speaking. Even Kivon's absent-minded tapping returned, faint at first, then steady. I didn't join, but I caught myself humming under my breath when I thought no one noticed. A week later came the Lantern Festival. The bridges were strung with glowing fruit, their light reflecting on the damp leaves like trapped moons. Families filled the air with music and roasted grain. I watched from my window, the scent of sweet smoke curling around me. Errol called up once, "Come down. There's cider left." I shook my head. He didn't press. I stayed until the music blurred into the rustle of the trees. When the last lanterns drifted downstream, I felt the quiet settle in my chest like stone. I told myself I preferred it. A few nights later Kivon found me again. He perched on the railing, his feet dangling over the drop. "You missed the dance," he said. Even Hesra smiled. "I'll survive." "Probably," he said, "but the forest might get bored." Before I could respond, he began tapping a slow rhythm on the rail. "You forgot your beat," he said. "Find it." I didn't move. "Suit yourself," he said, and left the rhythm behind, echoing faintly in the wood. I realized my fingers were drumming the same pattern against my knee. The next morning, Hesra paired me with a new apprentice named Ritha. She was all bright eyes and nervous energy, her hair tied back with a vine scrap. She ruined her first 3 baskets by pulling too tight. I recognized the panic in her shoulders. "Stop," I said. "You're strangling it." She looked at me, eyes wide. "Then what do I do?" "Listen." I guided her hands through the motion, pull, pause, loosen. "Hear that?" The vines gave a faint sigh. Her breath caught. "It's alive," she whispered. "It always was," I said. She laughed when her next basket held its shape. The sound startled the others, then spread, small, hesitant chuckles breaking the old stillness. Even Hesra's mouth softened. The air in the workshop felt lighter. From then on, Ritha followed me like a shadow. Her chatter filled the quiet corners I hadn't realized were empty. She asked about dye colors, about Hesra's younger days, about whether vines dreamed. I didn't know half the answers, but her questions reminded me that silence is a choice, not a sentence. The first storm of the new season came without warning. Wind slammed the shutters, rain hissed through the cracks, thunder rolled through the canopy like a drum. Hesra told us to stop, but no one could. The vines were too alive under our fingers. Ritha began humming to the rhythm of the storm. Kivin joined with his drum, Errol tapping the lift pole for bass. I found myself clapping time before I realized I'd moved. Even Hesra smiled, her eyes bright in the flicker of lightning. When the storm broke, we sat laughing, soaked and breathless, the air sharp with ozone and relief. That night I walked the bridges alone. Rainwater dripped from every rope and branch, glowing where the lanterns caught it. The forest steamed, breathing. I stopped where the canopy opened to the lower river. Mist rose in slow curls, silvered by moonlight. I pressed my hand to a hanging vine. Warmth pulsed beneath the skin of bark, steady and forgiving. "Thank you," I said. Now, as I write, the storm outside my window mirrors that night. Rain beats against the roof, softer now. The bridge hums again, a low note threading through the thunder. The apprentices below are quiet, but I know they're awake, listening as I once did, wondering if the ropes will hold. They will. The vines have learned to bend. The ink pools on the page before spreading. My joints ache, but the ache feels honest. I think of Hesra's patience, Errol's steady presence, Kivin's rhythm, Ritha's laughter, and realize the silence never took them away. It only taught me how to hear them. If you ever find yourself surrounded by quiet, apprentice, do not flee. Sit inside it. Let it press around you until you can tell the difference between emptiness and space. The forest listens in those moments. When you rise again, your hands will move with mercy instead of fear, and what you make will breathe. The rain has eased to a whisper. I set my pen down and rest my palm on the cover of this journal until the warmth seeps into the leather. The forest exhales. From somewhere below comes the low trill of a frog, then another answering. The bridge joins them with its hum. I smile. The forest was never silent. I was simply too loud to hear it. The rain finally gives up, slipping into that soft drizzle that smells of leaf rot and new growth. The roof still ticks as droplets find their way through old seams. I should close the shutters, but the night air feels clean, like a cool cloth on fevered skin, so I let it come in. My pen trembles from the chill, or maybe from the weight of remembering. Either way, the page keeps drinking the ink, and I keep writing. After the great storm that year, the air in Tara changed. The forest had drunk deep, everything smelled washed and green. The vines grew faster, thicker, their sap sweet as honey when split. The merchants called it a blessed season, but for me it felt like waking from a long fever. The silence that once choked the workshop now moved through it as rhythm, an undercurrent, not a wall. I remember one morning especially. Sunlight filtered through mist and broken shafts, catching dust motes that drifted like pollen. Ritha arrived early, carrying her half-finished basket as if it were an infant. I dreamt it was talking, she said, breathless. It told me to loosen the third knot. I smiled, pretending not to believe her. Then you'd better listen, I said. She grinned and set to work, humming the tune of the storm. The rest of us followed the sound until the workshop pulsed with it. Hesra said nothing, but she lingered near the doorway longer than usual, her lips curved at the corners. By midday the heat built again. Sap clung to our fingers, our aprons stuck to our arms. Kivon's drum kept time while Errol ran the lifts, his voice calling measurements down through the canopy. Every so often he'd glance up at me, and the look in his eyes held quiet pride. I hadn't realized until then that he'd been waiting for this, waiting for me to rejoin the rhythm. That knowledge warmed me more than the sun ever could. The silence still returned in small pockets, but it no longer frightened me. It became something I used, a place to rest between beats. In those pauses, I began to notice things I had always missed, the faint hiss of sap cooling in freshly cut vine, the way air thickened just before thunder, the subtle tilt of Hesra's head when she approved of a weave. The world was never still, I simply hadn't been patient enough to hear its slower songs. At the end of that season, Tara held the market festival. Merchants from along the river arrived with new dyes and cloth, with jars of preserved fruit that glowed like captured sunsets. The terraces filled with color and sound. We weavers had to finish triple our usual work. For once, I didn't dread the rush. The vines came easy under my hands, smooth and sure. Ritha worked beside me, her laughter constant. When she tangled a strand, she untangled it without panic. "See," she'd say. "They forgive quickly." Each time she said it, the whole room smiled. The night before the festival opened, we stayed late to finish the last shipment. The glow beads burned low, painting everyone's skin green. Hesra moved from bench to bench, checking rims and bases. When she reached mine, she traced the edge with her thumb, then said, "You found your breathing again." Her tone was soft but certain. I wanted to thank her, but the words caught. Instead I nodded, and she nodded back, our language of quiet complete. Morning came with bells and birds. The bridges thrummed underfoot as people poured toward the lower decks. Ritha tugged at my sleeve. "Come watch them open the stalls," she said. I hesitated. Crowds still made my throat close. But she didn't let go, and somehow I let her lead me down. The market was a riot of light. Stalls overflowed with crystal-dusted fruit, woven fabrics, jars of shimmer paint. Children ran between the ropes carrying toy baskets. I caught sight of Mara, the dye merchant, selling indigo scarves. When she saw me, her smile bloomed like a sudden flower. "You're back among the noise," she said. "Good." She pressed a length of blue cloth into my hands. "For the next storm." I tried to refuse, but she shook her head. "Take it. Color keeps silence honest." I wore it around my wrist all day, the blue bled faintly into my skin. At midday the traders tested our new baskets. Errol stood beside them on the lift, his jaw set. One by one the baskets were filled and lowered. None broke. None even creaked. When the last one held, applause rippled up from the lower decks. Hesra inclined her head but said nothing, she never needed to. Ritha beamed. "They didn't even flinch," she whispered. I laughed then, a full, unguarded sound that startled even me. For the first time since my apprenticeship began, Joy felt safe. That night, lanterns drifted down the river again. This time I didn't watch from my window. I stood on the lower bridge beside Ritha and Errol, the glow reflecting in their eyes. Music rose, and people began to dance, awkward, joyous steps that made the planks tremble. Errol offered his hand. "You're lighter than the vines now," he said. "Come prove it." I almost refused out of habit, but the rhythm caught me first. We moved with the others, clumsy at the start, then sure. The bridge swayed and hummed beneath our feet, and the hum felt like laughter. Even the stars seemed to sway. When the music faded, I stayed long after everyone left. The lanterns had drifted far downstream, but their reflections still shimmered in the dark water. I thought of the broken baskets I had buried months before and wondered if the forest had turned them into new growth by now. The idea comforted me. Perhaps that was the secret to everything, to let what breaks return to the soil and trust it to become something else. Years have passed since that festival, but storms still draw the old memories out. Tonight, as the thunder retreats into distance, I can almost see my younger self walking through mist toward the workshop, shoulders bowed, hands full of splinters. I want to tell her to look up, to see how the light bends through rain. How even the grayest morning carries color if you watch closely enough. But I suppose she wouldn't have believed me. Some lessons have to ripen slowly. The apprentices below are stirring again. I can hear the thud of feet, the scrape of benches being dragged back under shelter. They'll find this entry on my table in the morning, the ink uneven where the thunder shook my hand. Maybe they'll tease me for writing so much. Maybe one will recognize themselves in the lines. That would please me. Stories are seeds, after all. They only matter if someone else plants them again. I rise, stretching the ache from my shoulders. The workshop smells of damp wood and ink. My fingers are stained black where I've brushed the wet lines. I rub them together, the friction warms me. The glow beads light catches the old basket Hesra once hung above her bench. I take it down, dust clinging to my skin. The weave is crooked, the rim uneven, but when I press it, it still gives and holds. The breath inside it has never left. I run my thumb along its edge, whispering thanks, not for perfection, but for endurance. Outside, the rain has almost stopped. Mist gathers in the hollows between trunks. The bridge begins to sing again, its ropes vibrating in long, low notes that blend with the drip of water. I step out onto the balcony. The air is cool, heavy with the scent of wet bark and soil. Across the canopy, glow lights wink to life as the storm recedes. Every sound seems magnified, frogs, nightbirds, the sigh of wind through leaves. None of it is truly silent. It never was. If you're reading this, apprentice, know that storms will come for you too. Your baskets will break, your hands will shake, your world will fall quiet. Let it. The forest does not speak to the ones who never stop talking. In the hush that follows failure, listen. You will hear the heartbeat of everything living, steady and patient, reminding you that growth is noisy only after it's done in silence. The ink is nearly gone. I dip the pen one last time and write the line Hesra spoke on her last day in Terra, even silence leaves roots. She meant that nothing truly disappears. Every stillness hides motion, every ending hides a beginning. When I finish this entry, I'll leave the book open until the ink dries, so the words breathe instead of sealing shut. The storm scent will cling to the pages. Perhaps years from now, someone will open it and smell the rain, and remember that silence, too, was alive. A final roll of thunder sighs across the horizon. The bridge hums in reply. I close the journal, set the pen beside it, and watch the forest exhale into calm. For a long moment I do nothing, just breathe, feeling the air move in and out, in rhythm with everything around me. The vines outside sway, shedding droplets that sparkle in the new light breaking through the clouds. The hum deepens, a single note of contentment. The forest listens, I listen back. And together we are quiet, not from fear, but from understanding. The forest smells new this morning, wet bark, crushed leaves, the faint sweetness of pollen shaken loose by last night's storm. The bridge outside my window hums again, steadier now, the ropes vibrating like a creature stretching after sleep. My apprentices are already awake. I hear their feet thudding across the boards, laughter cutting through the mist. The world feels rinsed clean. I ought to be content, yet the hum carries a strange urgency. After a storm, everyone in terror rushes to rebuild, to prove we've survived. Maybe that's why my chest tightens when I hear the rhythm of hammers from the lower bridges. Renewal, if pushed too hard, can break as surely as silence can. Still, I rise. My muscles ache pleasantly from work and weather. The air is cool enough to bite, and droplets gather along the window frame, catching the first light. The vines hanging near the doorway glisten like veins of glass. I touch one, it trembles, alive and responsive. You're restless too, I whisper. All right then. Let's begin. The apprentices meet me on the terrace, their faces flushed with excitement. Ritha holds a coil of fresh vine over one shoulder. Kivin carries his drum as if a rhythm might be needed at any moment. Even Hesra, steady, unhurried Hesra, looks brighter in the washed dawn. The storm tore a section of our workshop bridge loose, and today we'll reweave it before the noon market opens below. We could leave it until tomorrow, I suggest half-heartedly. Ritha shakes her head. Everyone will be crossing today for supplies. They'll need it. Her enthusiasm is a current pulling us all forward. We gather the tools, knives, soaked vines, the heavy wooden mallet for driving new anchors. The air thrums with energy. The bridge itself, stretched between our platform and the storage decks, dips slightly from the storm's weight. Dew drips from the ropes into the river mist below. The sound is rhythmic, hypnotic. As we step onto the boards, the hum deepens underfoot. Kivin tests the first line, plucking it like a string. Still sings, he says. Just out of tune. I smile despite the worry in my stomach. That's how failure always begins, with a note that sounds harmless. We start at the eastern end, where the damage is worst. Hesra takes the lead, her knife slicing cleanly through a frayed length. She moves with precision born of decades, her gray hair whipped by the breeze. I work beside her, my fingers finding the rhythm she sets. Behind us, Ritha and Kivin secure replacement vines, threading them through the support rings. The morning hum grows louder, wood creaking, ropes sighing, our own breath sinking with the bridge's pulse. For a while everything flows. The sunlight strengthens, turning the mist gold. Sweat beads on my neck. Each knot ties easily, each strand settles where it belongs. Even Hesra hums a low tune as she works. Then Ritha calls, the middle anchors shifted. We crawl toward the center span. The old vine there has loosened from its stone mooring, rubbing grooves into the wood. Beneath it, the river churns, silver and restless. We can fix it, I say, but my voice sounds too certain. Hesra studies the gap. We'll need to release tension from the far side first, she says. If we pull here, we'll strain the base. I can hold it, Ritha insists, bracing her foot against a post. The wind tugs at her braid. She's still too new to know when courage masks impatience. I open my mouth to warn her, but Errol, steady as always, has already moved to her side. He slips his arm through the loose loop and leans back, taking the weight. Now, he grunts. We pull together, muscles straining, vines biting into our palms. The bridge groans, a long, low protest. For a breathless moment it feels alive beneath us, breathing, shifting, testing our resolve. Then the new line catches, the hum steadies, and we exhale as one. Ritha laughs first, exhilarated. It held. Yes, Hesra says, but her tone is measured. Now check the far support. If that one slipped too. The words dissolve in the wind. From the far end comes a sharp twang, the unmistakable sound of fiber snapping. Hold! I shout. But the bridge is already reacting. The released tension ripples back through the structure, a wave of motion that throws us off balance. Hesra grabs the railing, Ritha yelps as her foot slips. The entire span shudders. I drop to my knees, clutching the planks. Don't cut anything. Hesra orders. If we sever the wrong. The rest of her sentence vanishes under the thunderous crack of another vine giving way. The middle anchor jerks free, snapping upward like a whip. Ritha screams as a coil brushes her shoulder. I lunge, catching her arm. The bridge dips dangerously, the world tilting around us. For a heartbeat we hang suspended, the forest and river blending in dizzying blur. Then the vibration evens, one last creak, a groan, and everything stops. We're alive. The bridge holds, barely. I help Ritha to her feet. Her cheek is streaked with sap and dirt, but her eyes blaze with stubborn triumph. We can still fix it, she says. Hesra exhales sharply. We'll fix it when we understand it. The vines speak louder than our pride, girl. The words hit me harder than they hit Ritha. Pride, it's always pride that unravels us. I open my mouth to defend her, to defend myself, but a gust of wind rushes through the gap and turns our argument into music, the broken ropes vibrating in discordant chorus. We retreat to the stable platform. My hands shake as I coil a section of loosened vine. The fibers are warm from friction, sticky with sap. They cling to my skin like guilt. We'll need to reset the anchors from below, Hesra says. No sense pulling from above when the base is unsteady. I'll go, Errol offers. I'll go, I say at the same time. He looks at me, eyebrow raised. You. Someone has to see it firsthand. My voice steadies as I speak. I built most of this span. I know where it bends. Hesra studies me, then nods once. Take Ritha. You'll need her hands. And her courage. Ritha straightens, bruised but eager. Together we gather rope, harnesses, a small hammer, a pouch of wooden wedges. The descent will be short but slick with rain. Errol helps tie our lines. You don't have to prove anything, he murmurs as he knots the final loop. Then I'll do it for the bridge, I reply. The air under the canopy is cooler, wet with mist. The ropes creak as we lower ourselves, our feet brushing the slick vines that sheath the trunks. The sound of the river grows louder, a steady roar. Every drop of rain that falls from above seems amplified here. When we reach the underside of the span, the damage is clear. One of the main support vines has twisted itself into a braid around a smaller rope, cutting into its flesh. Sap oozes in slow rivulets, glowing faintly green in the dim light. The friction from our earlier strain must have fused them together. It's alive. Ritha whispers. It's trying to hold itself. Maybe, I say, but it'll strangle itself if we don't help. We brace against the beams. I wedge the knife's tip into the tangle and pry gently. The vines resist, tightening. Sweat stings my eyes. Pull when I tell you, I say. Ritha nods, gripping the line above her head. 1, 2, now. We heave. The vines stretch with a sound like tearing fabric, then snap free in a spray of sap. For a breath we're falling, only a few inches, but enough to send panic through me, then the ropes catch, jolting our harnesses. Got it. Ritha gasps, laughter bubbling out of her. Don't celebrate yet, I mutter, but I can't help smiling. The new line slides into place, humming softly as tension returns. The bridge's voice changes pitch, lower, steadier. We climb back up, dripping and breathless. Hesra stands waiting, arms crossed. Errol gives a low whistle. You're both covered in half the forest. Ritha wipes sap from her cheek. Better than being part of the compost. I collapse onto the platform, laughing despite myself. The sound echoes through the trees, startling a flock of tiny birds into flight. They wheel above us, flashes of silver green against the gray sky. For the next hour we test each section, tightening knots, adjusting weight. The bridge settles by degrees, finding its new balance. When the sun breaks through the clouds, it strikes the wet ropes and makes them shine like spun glass. Hesra inspects the final anchor. It'll hold, she says. For now. Ritha beams. Then we're finished. Almost, I say. The bridge needs to breathe again. Let's give it one last song. Kivin doesn't need further prompting. He taps his drum, slow and steady. The rest of us join in, hands against wood, feet keeping rhythm. The bridge vibrates under us, humming in tune, the sound rolling out through the canopy. Below, workers on the lower decks pause to listen. For a moment all of Terra seems to sway with us. When the final beat fades, Hesra places her hand on the railing. Good work, she says. The words are simple, but her eyes hold pride. We start to pack our tools, but a strange sound stops us, a faint snapping, somewhere near the midspan. Errol frowns. Did you hear? Before he can finish, the bridge lurches. The hum turns shrill, a high, keening vibration. Planks ripple like water. Someone shouts, Ritha, maybe, and then the center section collapses in a shower of debris. Back! Hesra cries. I grab the nearest rope, the world narrowing to motion and noise. The smell of sap explodes around us, sweet, stinging. Pieces of vine whip through the air. The bridge tears itself apart with terrifying grace, unraveling knot by knot as if erasing our work. The sound of it will haunt me forever, a long, rising wail that ended in silence too sudden to believe. When the dust settles, half the span is gone. The remaining ropes swing wildly, dripping sap and rain. Sunlight pours through the empty space where our bridge had been. No one speaks. Even the forest seems shocked. Ritha clings to the railing beside me, eyes wide. Hesra's face is unreadable, but her hands tremble as she lowers them from her ears. Errol kneels, scanning the gap. No one fell, he says, almost disbelieving. Everyone's here. Hesra nods once. Then we're lucky. Gather what's left before the next wind takes it. We move in a daze. Planks creak underfoot, sap sticking to our boots. The air smells of sweetness and smoke from broken fibers. I collect a handful of twisted vine, still warm from friction. It pulses faintly, as though alive and ashamed. As we pile the debris onto the terrace, Hesra turns to me. What happened? I don't know, I admit. The confession tastes bitter. We did everything right. Almost everything, she says quietly. Then she walks away to speak with the others. I look down at the broken ropes, their ends frayed and glistening. The bridge had sung this morning, now it's mute. Maybe silence has more kinds than I thought. For a long moment none of us moved. The mist drifted through the gap where the bridge had been, soft as breath, hiding the wound it left behind. Then the first wind after the storm came sighing through the trees, and the broken ropes began to sway, creaking like old bones. That sound woke us. Ritha was the first to speak. "It's my fault," she whispered. "I pulled too soon." I shook my head. "No. It was all of us. We pushed when the bridge wasn't ready." She looked unconvinced, the words rolling off her like rain off wax leaves. Hesra straightened slowly, brushing dust from her sleeves. "Blame doesn't mend wood," she said. "Hands do. Errol, fetch new planks from the storehouse. Kivin, cut a fresh bundle of vines. Liren, stay here. Keep the rest from walking where the span fell." Her tone left no room for argument, but I could hear the tremor beneath it. Even Hesra felt the sting of this mistake. I nodded and turned to Ritha. "Help me clear the edge. Watch for splinters." We worked in silence, stacking the broken boards to one side. The pieces still radiated warmth from friction, and sap glued our fingers together. Each plank told the same story, perfect weave on one side, violent rupture on the other. Ritha's eyes filled as she ran her hand along the edges. "They were beautiful," she murmured. "They'll be again," I said, though my voice shook. Errol returned first, his shoulders loaded with timber, breath misting in the chill. Kivin followed, dragging coils of vine that glistened wet and new. He tried for a grin. "At least the forest left us plenty of spare." "Don't joke," Hesra said sharply. Then, softer, "Not yet." We began again. The work was slower this time. Every sound carried weight, the hammer's dull thud, the creak of rope through rings, the wet slap of vines being tightened. My arms burned from effort, but I welcomed the pain. It kept the fear from settling. We moved with the caution of people handling a sleeping beast. No one dared speak above a whisper. Midway through the repair, the sun broke free of the clouds. Shafts of light slid through the canopy, igniting the dew into fire. Steam rose from the ropes, and the bridge began to hum faintly once more. The vibration ran up through my palms into my chest. "It's forgiving us," Ritha said in awe. Hesra's answering hum was agreement. "Then listen to what it says next," she murmured. By noon the new section spanned the gap again. Crude, unfinished, but holding. Errol tested each line with his weight, nodding when it sang the proper note. When he reached the middle, he looked back. "It's solid. Walk it slow," Hesra warned. "No heroics." He obeyed, each step deliberate. The bridge swayed but didn't dip. When he returned, relief rippled through us like wind through leaves. Ritha hooped once before clapping a hand over her mouth, cheeks flushed. Hesra pretended not to notice. We cleaned the site until the smell of sap faded into sunlight and sweat. When at last we sat down to rest, the silence that settled wasn't heavy. It was the tired, contented quiet that follows survival. Ritha leaned against the railing, staring into the brightness beyond the bridge. "It looked worse from the middle," she said. "Like the forest swallowed us." "It almost did," Kivin answered. "Would have been a good song, though." Errol laughed. "You and your songs." Hesra closed her eyes. "Let him sing if he wants. The vines like it." "They like laughter too," I added. It reminds them they're not the only ones bending. We stayed there until the shadows shortened. The forest's noise returned, the chatter of insects, the distant thump of fruit falling. Every sound felt amplified, as if the forest were deliberately showing us it was alive. When the apprentices drifted off to eat, I remained. My hands trembled from exhaustion. Sap streaked my forearms in thin amber lines. I flexed my fingers, each joint clicked. Below, the river flashed between branches, sunlight dancing on its skin. The rebuilt bridge glowed faintly where fresh fibers caught the light. It looked fragile, but the hum beneath my feet told me it would endure. I pulled out the small notebook I carried for quick sketches, what would later become this journal, and began to draw the pattern of knots we'd use today. The loops overlapped like braided breath, each one depending on the slack of another. The image struck me as truth disguised as craft. Nothing holds by being perfect, it holds by giving way. The next morning, the bridge was dry and gleaming. Serryn dismissed the apprentices to rest. I stayed behind to walk the span alone. The planks creaked softly, answering each step. Halfway across, I stopped and looked down. Mist rose from the river like smoke. Somewhere below, I could see the broken remnants of yesterday's ropes floating away, already becoming food for the forest. I whispered a farewell to them. The wind carried my words downward and brought back the faintest hum in return. Perhaps that was gratitude. Perhaps imagination again. Errol joined me quietly. "You're thinking too loudly," he said. "Habit," I admitted. He studied the lines of new vine. "You rebuilt faster than anyone else would have dared." "I rebuilt because I was afraid not to." He smiled faintly. "Fear can build bridges too. Until it tangles them. Then you untangle," he said simply, and walked on ahead. By the time the apprentices returned, laughter had crept back into their voices. Ritha brought me a cup of tea steeped from glow leaf. Its steam smelled like mint and ozone. "It tastes of storms," she said, proud of her discovery. I sipped, she was right. The bitterness carried memory, but also renewal. That afternoon, I taught them a new knot, one that allowed a thread to slip under pressure instead of tearing. The breathing loop, I called it. Serryn raised an eyebrow. "Still leaving your knots loose?" "Only enough to live," I answered. She nodded. "Then you're finally learning." When evening came, we lit the glow lights along the new span. The vines gleamed pale gold against the deepening green. People from the lower decks gathered below to watch, murmuring admiration. The bridge's hum changed tone, fuller now, woven with the resonance of fresh life. Kivin struck his drum once, a deep single note that made the air vibrate. "That's better," he said. "She's singing again." Later, after the others had gone to rest, I stayed to write. The forest was quiet except for the occasional drip of water and the soft scuttle of night insects. I wrote about the sound the bridge made when it tore, about the way silence swallowed the moment after. I wrote about Ritha's face when the ropes caught us, the mixture of terror and wonder. And I wrote about the hum that followed, the one that sounded less like forgiveness and more like promise. Because that's what the bridge is now, promise made visible. It hums because it remembers strain. It holds because it learned where to break. I think that's what all of us are, really, woven collections of near failures held together by breath and stubbornness. The dawn that followed glowed pink through the mist, the kind of soft light that makes everything appear untouched. I walked the bridge again, slower this time. Beneath my feet the ropes answered with low music, perfectly tuned. The apprentices waited at the far end, already laughing, already forgetting the fear. That's how youth survives. I let them keep their laughter. Mine had matured into something quieter but no less bright. In my journal I wrote, "Even new beginnings can strangle themselves if they forget to breathe." The sentence looked too simple to carry so much weight, but I left it as it was. When I closed the book, a breeze swept through the canopy and set the bridge humming again. I took that as agreement. Now, years later, the repaired span still stands. Every storm tests it, and every time it flexes instead of breaking. When visitors ask why it hums louder than the others, I tell them it's because it learned the cost of silence and the danger of pride in the same season. They laugh, not understanding, and I let them. The forest knows. The bridge knows. That is enough. If you are reading this, apprentice, remember, strength is not the opposite of softness. It's the result of it. Let your work yield before it snaps. Let your heart bend before it hardens. And when the dawn comes tangled, because it will, untie it with patient hands. The day will sing again. I end here because the glow bead is dimming, and the bridge outside has begun its nightly hum. Its voice is steady, warm, alive. I listen until my heartbeat falls into its rhythm, until the memory of breaking turns once more into song. The glow outside my window tonight has the color of old gold, soft, tired, heavy with dust. The bridge hums a deeper note than usual, as if remembering strain. It has been a long week of mending and hauling, of laughter that comes too late and silence that comes too soon. I can feel the forest pulling at us again, reminding us that even new vines tire when stretched too often. Still, I write. Rest can wait a little longer. The repairs after the storm should have ended days ago. The merchants kept sending requests, new crates, new lines, new baskets for the festival caravans, and we kept saying yes. Ritha took it as challenge, Kivin as game, Errol as duty. Hesra only raised her brow each morning, the way she does when she knows a lesson is on its way but refuses to spoil the ending. I remember one particular dawn when the fog hung low enough that the glow lights looked like they floated in water. The air was sweet with fermenting fruit. Ritha had already filled the troughs and was bent over a half-finished weave, humming to herself. "You were supposed to rest," I said. "I did," she answered. "For a whole hour." I laughed and joined her. It felt good to be needed again. By midday the workshop buzzed like a hive. Tools clinked, vines hissed through soaked fingers, the bridge outside sang with traffic. I moved among them, checking tension, correcting knots, feeding the rhythm. When Hesra passed, she murmured, "You're pulling the song too tight again." "It's holding," I said. "For now," she replied, and kept walking. For now, those two words followed me all afternoon. The sun climbed higher, burning the mist to steam. Sweat slicked the rails, even the vines felt hotter, their sap thinning under the heat. We were binding a new section of railing when the first complaint came from the ropes, an almost imperceptible sigh. I paused, hand on the knot, but Errol called from the far end, "All clear here," and the hum of work swallowed the warning. We finished by dusk, muscles trembling. The bridge gleamed under the fading light, each fiber glowing faintly. Pride swelled in my chest. The apprentices looked at me as though the structure itself had sprung from my hands. I remember thinking the forest had never seemed so still, so approving. That night, I couldn't sleep. The hum outside was too loud, low, constant, uneasy. I told myself it was the wind. When dawn came, I rose before the bell and stepped onto the bridge. The air smelled of dew and wood smoke. Birds called from the higher branches, their song sharp and bright. Below, mist rolled off the river in silver sheets. The ropes under my palms felt damp but solid. The hum vibrated through my bones, stronger than before, almost impatient. I walked the span slowly, testing each board. Nothing moved. I should have turned back. Instead, I decided to tighten one last set of knots near the central support. Old habits, control disguised as care. I crouched, pulling the line through the ring. The fiber squeaked under pressure. Just a little more, I muttered. Behind me came a voice, half asleep and teasing. You talk to the vines now. Errol. He was carrying a coil of rope, hair damp from washing. They listen better than apprentices, I said. He chuckled, stepping onto the span. Ritha sent me to fetch you for breakfast. The porridge is burning. 1 minute. You said that yesterday. I pulled again. The rope resisted, then gave with a sudden jerk. The sound it made, sharp, metallic, was wrong. My stomach dropped. Errol. The world snapped. The board beneath me cracked, then vanished. Air rushed up from the river, cold and wet. For a heartbeat I was weightless, the forest spinning above in shards of gold and green. The roar of the river swallowed my cry. I caught a glimpse of Errol lunging forward, his hand outstretched, too far. Then the harness line, left coiled at my belt from yesterday's work, snagged on a support hook. The jolt wrenched the breath from my lungs. My body swung outward, striking the side railing. Pain exploded through my shoulder, light burst behind my eyes. The rope burned across my ribs, holding, stretching, groaning. I dangled above the river, the taste of sap and iron in my mouth. The sound around me dimmed to a single heartbeat. My own voice, maybe. I don't know how long I hung there, seconds, a lifetime. The forest seemed to hold still, watching. Then Errol's shout cut through the ringing in my ears. Hold on. Don't move. I'm not planning to dance, I gasped. My humor sounded strange, cracked. He threw a second line down. The rope brushed my face, slick with dew. Tie it to your harness. My fingers shook too badly to obey. I tried once, twice. The knot slipped. Above, Ritha's terrified voice, she's falling. I'm not. I lied. Hesra's command came next, calm as stone. Errol, anchor the line. Kivin, brace the post. Ritha, quiet. Their movements thudded through the planks above me, a rhythm of rescue. I managed to loop the rope once around my arm. It bit into my skin but steadied me. Ready, I called, though the word came out weak. Pull. Hesra's voice, low and certain. The line tightened. Pain flared through my shoulder as my body rose inch by inch. I clenched my teeth, breathing through it. The bridge hummed under strain, its note quivering between failure and endurance. My boots scraped the side beam, finding purchase. Errol leaned out, eyes wide, face streaked with sweat and fear. He grabbed my harness, hauled once, twice. The rope snapped free from its hook with a sound like thunder. We tumbled backward together onto the deck, landing hard. For a long time we just lay there, gasping. Rainwater from the night before dripped from the ropes onto our faces. Ritha sobbed somewhere near the railing. Kivin's drum, always nearby, rolled once and came to rest with a hollow thump. Hesra knelt beside me, checking the harness. You're alive, she said, more statement than question. Mostly, I managed. My shoulder screamed when I tried to move. You'll bruise, maybe crack a rib, but you'll mend. The bridge too. Her eyes met mine, gray and unreadable. Tell me what you learned. I laughed, painful, breathless. You don't waste time, do you? Pain fades faster when you name its lesson. I closed my eyes, thinking of the snap, the fall, the silence afterward. That the forest doesn't like arrogance. And that I still haven't learned to listen. She nodded. Then start now. The hum under us settled into a low purr, as if in agreement. The vines, I realized, were still holding me even in failure. They had caught me, cradled me, sung me back to breath. The forest hadn't punished me, it had reminded me where I belonged. On the ground first, always. We spent the rest of the morning in slow motion. Hesra forbade me from helping, though I hovered nearby giving directions with my good arm. Ritha refused to leave my side until I assured her my bones were intact. You scared the sap out of me, she said, half angry, half in awe. I scared it out of myself, I answered. Now we're even. By midday, we'd secured the broken section. The bridge would need rebuilding again, but not today. When the apprentices finally went to eat, I stayed behind. My whole body ached, but the ache carried strange peace. The planks beneath me were warm in the sunlight. I could feel the bridge breathing. Errol returned with 2 cups of tea. Drink before Hesra finds out you're writing again, he said. I'm not writing, I lied, reaching for the cup. The steam smelled of mint and rain. He sat beside me, feet dangling over the edge where the board had cracked. I thought I'd lost you. You almost did, I said. But the vines owed me a favor. He chuckled softly. You talk like Hesra now. Is that praise or warning? Both. We sat in comfortable quiet, listening to the forest. The hum had returned to normal, steady and low. In the distance the river glittered where the sun pierced the mist. I breathed in the smell of sap and wood, of life still mending itself. For the first time, the word fall didn't feel like failure. It felt like truth. The afternoon drifted into gold. Birds returned to the branches above, testing the air with short, questioning calls, as if they too wanted to be sure the danger had passed. Each sound landed softly, like forgiveness. I sipped the last of the tea Errol had brought and watched steam twist away into sunlight. Pain pulsed behind my shoulder, a dull rhythm that matched the slow sway of the bridge. I traced the bruise spreading beneath the cloth, purple, green, then yellow where the skin had stretched. It was a map of consequence, a reminder drawn on my own body. If I closed my eyes, I could still feel the fall, the snap of rope, the rush of air, the weightlessness that was half terror and half strange relief. Falling is just the body remembering gravity, I thought. The forest never wanted us to forget it. Hesra returned before dusk, her shadow long across the planks. She carried a bundle of vine strands and a small jar of sap salve. Without a word she set them beside me and began cleaning the splinter cuts on my hands. The salve smelled of mint and resin, it stung, then cooled. When she finished, she sat beside me and looked out over the river. You built strong, she said finally. Stronger than you believe. The bridge still fell. It did what bridges do, it tested what held. She tapped her knuckles against the plank between us. Sometimes the fall is the test. We watched the light fade until the vines turned silver in the moonrise. The hum deepened with the evening breeze, steady again, carrying no bitterness. I realized that I was not afraid of its sound anymore. The pitch no longer warned, it conversed. It was saying, you are part of this now. You have fallen and risen. You belong. When I returned to the workshop, the apprentices had gathered near the troughs, whispering. Ritha saw me first and rushed forward, words tumbling. Does it hurt? Heshra said you'd live, but Kivin said your ribs sounded like cracking twigs. They sound fine, I interrupted, smiling. Though next time, perhaps we let the bridge do the stretching, not me. She blushed, half laughing, half crying. Kivin lifted his drum and beat a single, gentle note that echoed through the rafters. Every bridge deserves a song for staying, he said. The others joined with soft claps, a quiet celebration that felt better than applause. The following days passed in a rhythm of healing. Errol oversaw the heavier work while I sat nearby, teaching by voice instead of hand. It was a new kind of patience, slower but surer. Ritha wove while I described patterns, learning to see through words. Each night the bridge sang a little lower, settling into itself. The sound soothed me more than sleep. On the fifth morning, when I could lift my arm again without wincing, I took my knife and a length of vine and showed them a new weave. This one, I said, is called the breathing space. You leave a finger's width between the strands here. It looks weak, but that space saves it from tearing when the wind pulls too hard. Heshra nodded in quiet approval. Kivin frowned. Won't it look uneven? Only if you think perfection is the goal, I said. Strength is the goal. And strength needs room to move. They practiced until the pattern felt natural, the rhythm of give and take built into every loop. When the last section of railing was finished, I stood in the center of the bridge and listened. The hum was no longer one steady note, it breathed, expanding and contracting with the wind. Alive, resilient, beautiful in its imperfection. That evening, I wrote until the light failed. I wrote about the fall, about how the air felt like water around me, about how Errol's shout had sounded not like fear but like belonging. I wrote about Hesra's hands, the sap salve's sting, Ritha's tearful laughter. But mostly I wrote about the space between those things, the quiet that came after pain, the pause that allowed everything to knit back together. That pause, I decided, was the true bridge. When I finished, I left the pages open to dry and stepped outside. The forest was awash in blue light, the vines gleamed faintly where dew gathered. The river below murmured, gentle now. I touched the railing and felt the vibration travel up my arm into my chest. The hum matched my heartbeat exactly. The forest never meant for us to live above it without remembering how to fall. It built us high so that gravity could remind us of grace. Every slip, every bruise, every drop back toward the ground is the forest saying, come back, remember what holds you. I think of the apprentices, their laughter and fear, their boundless belief that things once fixed will never break again. They will learn soon enough that even joy frays under its own weight. My task is to teach them how to weave breathing space into their joy before it snaps. The glow bead on my table flickers. Outside, the bridge hums a lullaby for the tired, its voice deep and sure. The ropes glint faintly, silver threads in the dark. I close my eyes and let the sound fill me until the ache in my shoulder quiets. I know now that silence and sound are not opposites, they are the inhale and exhale of the same living thing. Tomorrow I'll show them how to reinforce the new joins, how to braid kindness into the rope so it flexes under weight. But for tonight, I simply listen. The bridge and I breathe together. The hum becomes a heartbeat, the heartbeat becomes sleep, and the forest, patient and eternal, keeps time. The mornings have turned soft again. Mist gathers low over the river, curling like smoke around the bridge posts. When I step outside, the air feels full of whispering, dew sliding from leaves, ropes creaking, the faint hum of the bridge waking to its own heartbeat. I stand for a long time with my palm on the nearest rail and let it speak through my skin. It no longer sounds like my work, it sounds like ours. The apprentices are already awake. I can hear them arguing below about the new pattern Ritha invented yesterday, something she calls the double breath weave. Kivin insists it's unnecessary, Errol says it wastes vine, and Ritha argues that it sings better in the wind. Their voices tumble over one another like water over stones. I almost step in to settle it, but stop myself. The bridge needs to hear their voices now, not mine. Since the fall, the work has changed. We still weave, still patch, still barter with the merchants, but the rhythm is slower, fuller. There's laughter in the pauses and silence between the jokes. Hesra says that means the workshop is healthy again. She smiles more often now, small smiles that fade quickly, but they're real. Sometimes I catch her watching me with that measuring look she has, the one that means she's weighing when to let go. This morning I told her I wanted to try something new. Listening lessons, I said. She lifted a brow. They already have ears, she said. Not the right kind. Then teach them. So I gathered the apprentices on the terrace after breakfast. The air smelled of roasted grain and sap smoke. Below us, the bridge gleamed wet where mist still clung to the ropes. Today we won't weave, I said. We'll listen. Ritha blinked. To what? To everything. I gestured to the forest around us. But start with the bridge. They exchanged puzzled looks, but obeyed. Errol placed both hands flat on the planks. Kivin pressed his ear to the railing. Ritha crouched, frowning in concentration. Tell me what you hear, I said. Water, Errol answered first. Wind, Ritha added. Kivin grinned. Your stomach. You skipped second breakfast. The others laughed, but I shook my head. That's hearing with your head. Try with your hands. Close your eyes. They did. The morning quiet settled over us like a blanket. For a long time there was nothing but the sound of breathing. Then Ritha whispered, It's purring. Kivin snorted. Bridges don't purr. They do when they're content, Hesra's voice said behind us. I hadn't noticed her approach. She set her palm on the rail beside Kivin's. Feel that? That's weight shifting through the fibers. That's life continuing. The apprentices fell silent again, more respectful this time. The bridge hummed softly, the vibration passing through wood into skin. I could almost see the awareness dawning on their faces. When they opened their eyes, they looked lighter, as if they'd glimpsed the invisible rhythm that ties all things. From now on, I told them, we weave to that rhythm. If you can't hear it, stop working until you can. The bridge doesn't need more hands, it needs better listening. Kivin groaned. So listening's homework now. Yes, I said, smiling. And the test is survival. Over the next week, the lesson spread into everything we did. We worked without speaking, letting the sound of fiber and breath guide us. Mist became metronome, wind conductor, heartbeat percussion. When the merchants passed below, they paused to stare, perhaps wondering how a group of silent weavers could make such living music. One evening, as we tightened the final knots on a shipment of fruit crates, Ritha said softly, It feels like the bridge hums back when we hum to it. It does, I said. Sound is a circle. What you give comes home. Errol added, then the bridge must like you best. It hums loudest when you speak. I pretended not to blush. Maybe it's laughing at my mistakes. That night, a gentle wind stirred the canopy. The vines along the rail shimmered in the moonlight, vibrating to a rhythm that matched our own pulse. I slept easily for the first time in weeks. The peace held for days. Then came the storm. It started quietly, with a breeze that felt too warm for morning. The forest was restless, birds shifted from branch to branch, their wings flashing silver. Heshra squinted at the sky. It's building again, she murmured. Early for the season. Should we lash the bridge? Errol asked. Do it, I said, already moving. We worked fast, securing lines, checking anchors. The apprentices moved with the calm efficiency we had practiced, voices low but sure. Clouds massed overhead, bruised and green. Thunder grumbled in the distance like a throat clearing before a song. By midday the wind howled. Rain came sideways, turning the air to glass needles. The bridge twisted under the force, the rope straining like harp strings pulled too tight. Kivin shouted something lost to the gale. Hesra's command cut through the roar, ease the west line. Let it breathe. Ritha and Errol ran to obey. I started after them, then stopped. Heshra caught my arm. Let them, she said. You've taught them what to do. Trust them to do it. Every instinct screamed to act, to lead, to protect. But I stepped back, forcing myself to watch. The rain blurred everything into motion, Ritha's braids snapping in the wind, Errol's silhouette braced against the ropes. Kivin crawling on hands and knees toward the anchor post. They worked without shouting instructions, reading the bridge through movement alone. The hum that rose from the structure shifted from panic to rhythm, steadying like a heartbeat finding pace. A sharp crack split the air, the south line snapping free of its knot. I flinched, but before I could move, Ritha was already there, threading a replacement vine through the ring, her hands sure and quick. Hold, she shouted, voice fierce against the storm. Kivin caught the slack, Errol anchored the far end. The line held. The bridge steadied. Heshra smiled beside me, rain streaming from her hair. They're listening. I swallowed hard. Pride and humility tangled in my chest. They are. The storm raged for another hour, then broke as suddenly as it had come. The forest exhaled. Steam rose from the planks, carrying the scent of sap and lightning. The apprentices collapsed in laughter and relief. Ritha threw her arms around Kivin, he pretended to protest but didn't let go. Errol sat down heavily, wiping water from his eyes. You did it, I said simply. The bridge still stands because of you. No, Ritha answered, still breathless. Because of what you taught us. Heshra snorted. Then next time, she can stay in bed. We all laughed until the sound blurred with the forest's own rustle. Even the bridge seemed to chuckle beneath us. When night came, I walked the span alone. The ropes glowed faintly, alive with the residue of stormlight. I placed my palm on the center post and felt the vibration run through me, strong, layered, not one voice but many. Mine, Hesra's, Ritha's, Kivin's, Errol's, all woven together. The bridge had learned to listen, and in listening, it had found harmony. In the quiet after the storm, I could also hear what wasn't there, the scrape of worry in my breath, the old itch to fix what didn't need fixing. I stood with my palm on the post until the bridge's hum folded into my heartbeat and back out again. A conversation easy as tide. In the morning, the apprentices gathered on the terrace with the shy triumph people wear when they're surprised by their own strength. Kivin claimed he'd known all along we could ride the storm. Ritha contradicted him, grinning, and demonstrated the knot she'd improvised under pressure. Hesra watched with that small curve at the corners of her mouth, pride hiding like a glowfly under leaves. "Tell them," she murmured to me, barely moving her lips. "Tell them what?" "That the bridge listened," she said, as if that were simple fact like weather. "And that you did, too." I cleared my throat. "Yesterday you worked with your hands and your ears," I told them. "That's why it held. You'll be tempted to celebrate speed. Don't. Celebrate the moment you felt the line ease because you told it to, not because you forced it." Errol lifted his cup in a small salute. "To listening," he said. "To listening," we echoed, and the bridge answered with a low contented tone, as if repeating the toast in its own language. After breakfast I started them on an exercise Hesra had taught me when I was young and impatient enough to hate it. We sat along the rail with bundles of vine and we split the fibers into threads finer than hair. The work asks for patience. Pull too fast and the threads snarl, pull too slow and they dry in your hands. I told them to work without looking, to feel the moment each strand released from the next. The rustle of fiber was like rain in miniature. When someone tugged too hard, the sound changed, and 4 other sets of hands paused instinctively. It felt like playing a drum circle you couldn't see. At midday a scent of roasted fruit drifted up from the lower decks. Merchants were celebrating the spared cargo. Ritha wrinkled her nose. "After all that, they feast." "Everyone survives in their way," Hesra said, passing around cups of cool water. "We weave. They roast." Kivin licked his lips. "We could weave and roast. After you finish your threads," I said. By afternoon, the practice became play. Errol tapped the railing with his knuckles, soft as a moth's wing. Kivin matched him with the drum. Ritha's voice slid between them, humming the simple, endless pattern that had steadied the storm's spine. I worked quietly, splitting fiber and feeding their rhythm with the sound of my breath. When the breeze lifted, it carried our music across the canopy. A pair of children on the next bridge picked it up and made it their own, clapping and stomping. I heard laughter echo back. The bridge wasn't only listening, it was teaching, passing rhythm outward, the way a river passes light downstream. That evening, when the glow beads lit, I called them together. We stood at the midpoint where the hum is strongest and I tied a short length of vine across the handrail. "What's that for?" Ritha asked. "A reminder," I said, knotting it loose enough that wind could move through. "Every structure gets one from now on. The breathing space, so we never forget to leave room for life." Kivin tugged it. "The merchants will say it looks sloppy. Then the merchants can learn to value neatness less than endurance." Hesra's eyes glinted. "I'll tell them myself if I have to." We laughed, and the bridge laughed with us in its low, woody way. A few weeks drifted past the way days do when they're full and unremarkable and perfect: morning mist, work, the hum, shared bowls of grain, the song of knives on wood, dusk falling over the ropes like a shawl. I slept well. My shoulder healed into a stiffness that only noticed storms. I woke before bells because the bridge's first note of day tugged me with a mother's hand. Then, during one of those mornings that felt as ordinary as breath, I realized the journal should end. It came to me in a small moment, Ritha correcting Kivin without shame or edge, Hesra letting the apprentices hang their own lanterns without checking each hook. Errol catching a whisper in the bridge and tightening a knot before anyone else felt it. I stood with a coil on my shoulder watching them weave and unweave, listening and answering, and it was like looking at a basket that had been finished without my knowing, the pattern already coherent, the rim already smooth. Hesra must have seen something change in my face. "The day's work is not the only thing that ends at dusk," she said, tying off a line with that simple finality only her hands can make elegant. "I've been walking to the edge of it for days," I admitted. "Then step," she said, and returned to her station as if stepping were as easy as breathing. I didn't announce anything. Instead, I set up a different kind of day. We met before dawn with our cups of tea steaming like small fogs in our hands. I told them we were going to practice the hardest skill in weaving. Kivin asked if that meant knots he hadn't learned yet. Ritha asked if it meant working with wet vine in cold air. Errol, ever practical, asked if it meant doing nothing. "Close," I said. "Today we practice not speaking." Groans all around. "For one bell," I said, "only touch and breath. If you need something, show it. If the bridge needs something, you'll hear it." I set the hourglass on the rail and turned it. The sand began to fall in a slim bright stream. For a while there was only the rush of our own thinking. Then our thoughts slowed to meet the pace of the falling sand. Ritha's shoulders softened. Kivin's tapping found the bridge's deeper note. Errol split a vine so cleanly the thread slid apart sighing. The early light came through the leaves and drew pale bands across the planks, our shadows moved like quiet birds over water. When the last grain fell, nobody reached for their tongue. The bridge sang that warm, round note it saves for the ends of lessons. Again. Ritha asked, smiling, as if I'd offered her a sweet. It made my throat ache, the kind of ache you get when joy finds a place it can stay. At midday, Hesra sent me to speak with the market master about tomorrow's deliveries. I knew what she was really sending me to do, walk alone and hear the shape of leaving. The lower deck smelled of dye and fruit and wet rope. People nodded to me, and I nodded back, and it all felt like a kindness that belonged to the village now, not to me particularly. At the market master's table, I saw the orders stacked neatly with their weights and lengths and knots required. I saw Ritha's tight, careful script on the margin of one list, correcting it, politely, accurately. The world did not need my hand there, only my blessing to let other hands replace it. When I returned, the apprentices were finishing a span on the west side, the tricky one that always catches wind. I stood out of the way and watched. Errol fed them fiber at the pace they could handle instead of the pace the day wanted. Kivin tested each line's song, frowning until it found its pitch. Ritha left that small space in every join, her breathing matching the give. Not one of them looked over to see whether I approved. They didn't need to. The bridge told them everything. I waited until dusk. We ate on the terrace with our bowls and cups, the glow beads drawing a quiet halo around the meal. The hum was strong, confident, layered. I let them talk out their laughter and spill their stories. Hesra watched me letting them. When the talk fell to a comfortable hush, I set my bowl aside. "I'm leaving," I said. They looked at me with the confusion of people who mishear a word that sounds like another. Ritha's spoon hovered halfway to her mouth. Kivin's drumstick paused above a rim. Errol didn't blink. "Where?" Ritha asked, not like a child begging a promise undone, but like a builder needing a map. "Across the river, to a village that only weaves nets and needs a bridge to cross their own fear." I smiled. "They sent a runner last week." I held the message in my pocket for 3 days, thinking the hum would answer it for me. "And did it?" Errol asked. "Yes," I said. "It told me you could hear without me." Kevin tried and failed to make a joke. His mouth twisted, then settled. "That's good," he said. It was both true and hard. He let both live in his voice. Hesra reached across the table and laid her hand over mine. "You knew how to fall," she said. "Now you know how to leave." Ritha's eyes shone in the glow. "Will you write to us?" "I will write to the bridge," I said, and tapped the rail. "And it will tell you what I said." We stood then, because sitting felt too small for the shape of things. I led them to the midpoint and tied a fresh short length of vine at the rail, a second breathing space beside the first. "For goodbyes," I said, "which are just the forest's way of moving us farther along the weave." Errol cleared his throat. "Say something we'll remember when the storm comes and we forget to listen." He meant a rule, a charm, a sentence that fits in a pocket. I looked out across the river. Mist rose, catching the last of the day's light. "A bridge that only speaks will one day break," I said. "A bridge that listens will last forever." Ritha repeated it under her breath, not to memorize it but to hear how it settled in her own mouth. Kevin tapped the drum once, then twice, sealing the words into wood. We worked a little longer, not because we had to but because working together felt like the right shape for an end. When night came fully, we rolled the tools with more care than usual. Everyone knows how to be gentle when they are about to be left, even the knives seemed to lie down quietly. Sleep did not come quickly. I walked the span one more time, trailing my fingertips along each knot as if blessing them individually. When I stopped at the middle, I pressed my palm flat and spoke aloud to the wood, to the vine, to the hum I knew would answer. "I'll be somewhere downstream," I said. "If you need me, send the song." The bridge thrummed once, no louder than a heartbeat, and then stilled again, satisfied. In the morning, I packed simply, a knife, a mallet, a coil of vine for teaching, a small jar of sap salve, this journal. The apprentices waited at the edge of the terrace with their own quiet burdens. Ritha wore determination like a woven cord across her chest. Kevin's drum hung at his side, his hand rested on it as if it were a person. Errol had his rope across one shoulder but no other gear, as if ready to walk with me and also ready to turn back because the bridge asked him to. Hesra stood with her arms folded, her hair caught up in a knot I had always wanted to learn but never could. "You will visit," she said. It wasn't a question. "I will," I said. It was a promise and a hope. Ritha hugged me hard enough to knock the air from my lungs. Kevin lifted his drumstick in a half salute. Errol did nothing, then everything, all at once, pulled me into a brief embrace that smelled of wet rope and tea in the clean sweat of morning work. He said, "When you cross the new bridge, don't tighten the first knot yourself." A practical blessing, which is the only kind we ever let ourselves exchange. I walked to the far end and turned once more. They looked small, then suddenly vast, the way apprentices do when the knowledge poured into them rises to the surface and makes more room for their faces. Behind them the bridge shone pale and sure, humming the note that means ready. "Listen," I called. "We will," they answered together. The bridge answered too, a third voice completing the chord. I took the path that threads through the lower decks and down to the river where the ferry ropes live. The air down there is cooler, smelling of clay and riverweed. The ferryman nodded and pushed us out into the slow current. Water gurgled against the boat, and the hum from above thinned to a bright line, then a memory, then a comfort I could store like bread in my pocket. On the far bank, the trees wore different moss and the mist curled with a new accent. I stepped onto the unfamiliar boards and felt for the vibration that lives in every built thing. It was there, shy but present, waiting for someone to ask what song it wanted. I placed my palm against the rail and closed my eyes. Behind my eyelids, light redrew itself into patterns of rope, leaf, river. I breathed until the hum found the place in my chest it prefers. Then I opened my eyes and began to walk. Tonight, writing by a smaller glow bead in a room that does not yet smell like me, I can still hear Tara's bridge if I sit very still. The sound comes thin and pure, the way a favorite tune does when you hum it alone. It is not homesickness. It is the knowledge that the world holds together because thousands of small songs learn to lean into each other's rests. So I will end this book with the quiet I once feared. The page will carry it, the way a well-woven basket carries fruit without bruising it. If you have read this far, you already know the shape of the lesson, but I will say it once more because saying is also weaving. Leave room in your work for air, leave room in your heart for others' hands, leave room in your days for a bridge to answer you back. The glow bead dwindles. The river breathes below my window, a different river that still knows every river's rhythm. Somewhere in the dark a rope shifts and a plank replies. Tomorrow I will ask this village what it needs and teach them to listen when it answers. Tomorrow, across the water, my apprentices will wake to a hum that needs no translation. I close the journal gently, so the words don't startle. Outside, a new bridge waits, quiet and full. I rest my palm to the wood, and it returns the pressure, light, curious, alive. We breathe once together, twice, and then I let the silence keep the promise of sound.